Always like to focus in on a number of different things here. We're going to look at the Washington County Haz Mat Team today. Allenton Fire Chief John Breuer is in, and Battalion Chief John Spartz from the West Bend Fire Department. Need to correct myself. We'll get into all that and much more. John's, guys, good to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, thanks, Tom.
Well, good to have you. And before we touch on the Haz Mat Team and what it's all about, how lucky we are to have our own team here. John Breuer, if we could start with you, sir, the Washington County Fire Chiefs Association. Of course, I'd like to ask you, who's a part of this? We appreciate all of them.
Yes, it's the 13 departments that are in the county that make up the Chiefs Association, the Fire Chiefs Association, and those departments are Allenton, Boltonville, Fillmore, Germantown, Hartford, Jackson, Kewaskum, Colesville, Newburgh, Richfield, St. Lawrence, Slinger, West Bend, along with the Washington County Sheriff's Department, Washington County Emergency Management Office, and Moraine Park Technical College. And those people coordinate, things like what we're talking about in a little bit here, the Haz Mat Team. That association coordinates those efforts so that we're all know what to expect if we call that resource, what's available as a resource, and it gets the wheels turning. We were explaining off air, and then John said to me, I think his head is spinning a little bit because
referring to me, yeah.
Yes,
and it's true. Yeah.
Little things that people say, how do you get that many resources there that quickly? Well, it's not one person. It's a network of knowing what you need, where to get it, who to contact, and the ball starts rolling from there.
Does it ever? Yeah, the ball certainly starts rolling. We're going to touch on different scenarios. You may remember 3-4 years ago, the incidents near Slinger schools when the railroad car went off the track anyway, and the spill in that case. We'll get into different scenarios, and of course what's going on in Beaver Dam as well. Battalion Chief John Spartz, sir, good to have you in. Good to meet you. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having me.
Well, you bet. Now, I said Chief John Spartz earlier. You're Battalion Chief John Spartz. There are different types of chiefs.
Correct. I'm a battalion chief. Generally, my responsibilities are to run the shift. We have a career department in West Bend, so I run the shift on a daily basis. And then I also respond to emergency scenes and work on incident command in those types of situations. And what that means is I run the incident, and then until somebody with more responsibility shows up, and that gets delegated. So that's all part of the process. But I'm usually one of the first responders on a lot of the emergency scenes.
How long have you been with the West Bend Fire Department?
I was thinking about that on the way over. It'll be 30 years this December.
Awesome.
I have 22 full-time.
Good for you.
So, thank you.
How does that feel?
It's great. It's a great job. Best job in the world.
Yeah, no doubt. John Spartz is here. John Breuer is here as well. John Breuer, to go back to you for a moment here, the Washington County Haz Mat Team. Let's start from the start here. As you mentioned, my head is spinning, but what is this, and how important is it?
From a local standpoint, the resource is phenomenal that we have it within our county. It's made up of assets through the area departments and the Chiefs Association, and then we established a team a number of years ago and then took it to the next level where we're actually part of what we call a state asset program, which Chief Spartz will get into in a little while. But what that does is if we have something in either Allenton or Boltonville or Fillmore, a community that doesn't have a lot of resources available for specialty type things like that, this is a resource through the county that we can share with other departments by just contacting dispatch, letting them know that, hey, we're going to need the Haz Mat Team here. They'll contact the emergency management office in the county as well. They'll assemble the team, page them out, and then start bringing the resources. There's resources housed in Hartford and in West Bend. There's things for spill containment, confinement, monitoring, metering, hazmat suits, and the people on the team, which is made up of the 13 departments members, various members throughout the county. They'll assemble at scene, and there's people assigned to bring the trailers and the equipment from Hartford and West Bend to the location that it's needed, and then from there it gets divvied out, just like we're fighting a fire or we're doing a water rescue or things like that. We talked about the dive team about 2 months ago. Works the same way. It's resources within the county that are here that we don't have to wait for a Milwaukee or an Oshkosh or a Madison to come. Now, that doesn't mean that those resources aren't going to come, but we're capable of doing quite a bit of stuff within the county with the level of training we have with our technicians on the team and the equipment we have available.
resources in Hartford and West Bend, as you just pointed out, the equipment, right, and the things that they need to wear. That's what that means.
Yes, the equipment.
It's close. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, the equipment, monitoring, because you don't
Okay.
just go in and run into a situation like that.
Yeah,
Hazmats are they're delicate situations. The hardest thing for the firefighters to get in their mind, and John trains people, I train people too. The hardest part, we're trained to go in and get this thing done. With hazmat, you got to really discipline them to tell them to put on the brakes. We need to know what's going on here before we go in. If we can't identify it and know the hazards prior to it, we're not getting anywhere near it. But we're going to secure the perimeter. Don't let access to people in there. May have to worry about weather conditions. If wind's a problem and it's a inhalation hazard, we may have to evacuate what we call like teardrop things that spread out from the incident based on what do we have out there today, an ambient temperature and wind and daylight, nighttime. All those things go into factor on how big this thing could or could not escalate to.
John Spartz, again, very lucky to have this hazmat team. So time is of the essence, yet as John Breuer just pointed out, you're careful, obviously. Take us through the process here. And for example, maybe a rail car leaves the tracks, there's a spill. I mentioned Beaver Dam. You have the apartment where they found a 20-year-old individual, a lot of explosives. That's such a scary story. So yeah,
Definitely. When you get to a hazmat situation, like Chief Breuer said, we have to slow down and you have to look at the situation. You're dealing generally. Our team is equipped to deal with the chemicals. We're equipped to recognize and identify any type explosive type situations. Safety, of course, is the utmost importance. So we back off. When a fire department finds something like that, even something that's similar like a meth lab, they could be fighting a fire and realize there's a meth lab in the building. They'll back out, and then it slows down, and we start realizing what we have to have. You have to monitor the atmosphere. We have to make sure that the people going in, the technicians going in, can do it safely. Environment is a big area of concern that we have to be aware of. They'll go in, we'll sit down, we'll determine what we have. It could take us 2-3 hours to determine what we have. The situation with Beaver Dam, it took them a day to figure out what they have because of the complexity of all the chemicals involved. And generally, that's once you have that, then you can come up with a plan on how you're going to mitigate the situation. So it's a process where if a hazmat team comes in, you have to slow down and really do your homework. And we use any resources we can get. We use a lot of computer work. Chemists are big in this area. We'll even use private industry. If there's a business that has an issue going on, we'll go in and we'll work with the local business. We'll try to figure out what's happening so we can help them and get them back in business as soon as we can. That's key. A lot of times a business will hear hazmat team and they'll just go, oh no, we don't want you, because they know it's going to slow down. And I always try to go in with the mentality that we're going to get them back in business as soon as we can. Sometimes it takes a little longer, but the biggest key is to do it safely, and we don't want to get anybody else hurt.
John Spartz with us, also Allenton Fire Chief John Breuer as well, and Battalion Chief Spartz with the West Bend Fire Department. Staying with you just for a moment here, and I'm thinking specifically of a spill. And it can be so many different things. So again, let's say it's a rail car like that instance we had in Slinger 3-4 years ago. Can you take us through that? You guys arrive, what happens?
Sure. What happened is on the Slinger rail car incident or train incident, we wound up on scene, and it was in a kind of a remote area from where I arrived on the scene, and actually I was there with the Slinger Fire Department. And we had to recon the area because it was such a big situation. We had to figure out what we had. So really the hazmat team's role in that was to do I'm calling it a recon. We had to go out and see what we had. We had to find where the spill was. We had to find what the spill was. As we got into it, we realized it was spilled into a small drainage creek that was actually flowing water. So then we had to find out where that went. And we realized it went to the Rock River after a mile or so. So we had to chase that down. Once we found out where that was, we got ahead of it and tried to dam it and put absorbents in there to catch the diesel fuel. It was diesel fuel at that point. We lucked out with a lot of that because there were other cars with other product in it, but it was contained to just mostly the engine diesel. So we were able to do that. Once we got that mitigated or situation with the water flowing kind of taken care of, the railroads are unique. They're their own entity. They have teams coming in. They had, if I remember right, the one person in charge of the railroad said I had 3 battalions coming in, which meant a lot of people. And you saw the influx of the resources, and they had that line open in a day. So it is, again, time is money, especially with the railroad. They want to get that open as soon as they can, and they have their own crews that take care of it. We did the local response. We got the water done. Our involvement then pretty much was out of it because of the federal level. At that point, we were able to clear the scene. So it was a quick, maybe about 6-7 hours for us on the scene. After that, then the railroads take it over. But that's what our job is to contain it, to do the initial containment, and then the companies have cleanup companies that'll come in and finish the cleanup once it's stabilized.
John Breuer, in that case, and probably other cases as well, let's say you have homes nearby. Your location's such a big thing, isn't it, first of all?
Yes.
In terms of a spill, what have you. So you have folks, happens at 3 a.m, they're sleeping, becomes quite a deal, doesn't it?
Yes, and the type of occupancy of what you have around it. Is it homes? Is it businesses? Is it a hospital or a school? Some of those things, if it's a hazard where it's more of a what we'd call an airborne or inhalation hazard, taking people outside could expose them more, so now we may have to what we call shelter in place. So that's a matter of taking them in that building and that structure, and then you basically are quarantined, for lack of a better term, in that facility. Again, it's all going to depend on what we identify we're dealing with, where it's going, what it's doing, the quantity, and all those things. There's a lot of things that go into determining what may or may not have to be done with the evacuation. Big news things years past, remember the Wyawega train wreck where they were out of town for 2 weeks just because of the explosion hazard. So, you know, when they say, initially on some of those cases you're looking, most of the minimums are 1,500 to 2,000 feet. A lot of them are half, quarter, a mile. If you've got a explosion hazard and you got to evacuate a mile, now let's say if that happened right at the railroad crossing in Hartford here on Main Street, that's going to take quite a bit of the city out if we have to go a mile out.
Absolutely.
And we're now not only get them out, but where do you go with them? Where do you put them? Those types of things, and then how long is that going to be? So there's a lot of things that go into play with that, and it's all going to depend on what we're dealing with. The stability of that product and the capabilities of getting it mitigated, and where those resources to get that mitigated done are coming from. Because like Chief Spartz said, as we have the railroad is a good asset, but when they come, they bring like a circus, if you will. It sounds like that, but a boatload of people. So where do you park 25 semis with trailers? Where do you they're going to bring in, because they want that rail line open if it's a rail situation, where do you put 4 bulldozers on lowboys? And the railroad is not bashful about telling you that it's going to cost them, for every hour their line is closed, it's about $750,000 they're losing if rail cars are not going through there. So time is important, but it also has to be done right and safe. And they're very good, but they're always telling you, we're not stopping. Let's keep moving here. So, and that's understandable. I mean, that's commerce. They're the ones paying the bills. Industry supports all of us through tax dollars and our funding, and granted, homeowners do that as well. But the majority of them are the larger stakeholders. So you have to work with them, but you can't ignore safety and what's right. And environmental issues are the biggest thing, because sometimes an environmental issue is a bigger concern. So. In a situation like you're talking about Beaver Dam, the reason they're taking that down is because it's so volatile and hazardous, and it's going to be more hazardous to try and move it than to take it in place. So we have some properties in our area that have a hazmat situation. If it's a fire situation and it's through their insurance carrier and the property owner and the building or the business owner, the plan for that is secure the area, control runoff, and don't put any more water on it than you absolutely need to, because you can take a 2,000 gallon spill, dump 200,000 gallons of water on it, and that's going to run off somewhere. Now that 200,000 gallons of water on that 2,000 gallons of chemical is going to literally take hundreds and thousands and in a lot of cases millions of dollars to clean up the environmental factors, because water runs downhill. It's going to get somewhere.
Yeah.
And that's the concern with hazmat and water and those types of things. And that's always in the back of an incident commander's mind as, what are we going to do? What do we have to do? So the key to having good planning with the hazmat situations is identify your properties, know what they've got. The people who have and store and use the hazardous materials on a regular day are usually your best resource for information, because they have to be. Through regulation on state and federal level, they can't just say, well, yeah, we'll kind of deal with it if it happens. They've got the information that you're looking for, and some of them are really good about having that handy, and most of them have it ahead of time to us, and we have that as well. Some of them through what we call Tier 2 reporting, they have to do it by regulation, tell us what's there, so then it's up to us to make sure we update our information on a yearly basis, that what's there and what's not there and those types of things. So it's around the clock every day of the year process on
Absolutely.
knowing what's going on.
That's for sure. John Spartz, a couple of minutes left here as we wind it down. Again, talking about the Washington County Haz Mat Team. We're so lucky to have it. And as John Breuer pointed out, resources in Hartford and West Bend. And John, again, this is the first step. This is emergency response. And in some cases, you can get support from the state to come in. Let's say there's a spill on I-41, and it's a big one, and it's a couple of semis, just as an example there. Can you take us through that? So you guys go, and maybe you need more support here.
Right. What will happen is we would respond. The local fire department responds. They call us in. We'll come in, and then as we get on scene, we'll look at it and determine what we have. We'll look and see if we can handle it at our local level. If not, we contact the state through emergency management, which Rob Schmidt is our local emergency manager. He also works very closely with the team, and we would then contact their information center, and they would then ask us what resources we need, and we could tell them, and they would work on helping supply us with those. Probably the next step, if it would be a very complex type spill, we'd probably be working with the Milwaukee Hazmat team. They would come up. We definitely would be calling them. Not probably, we would be calling them, because they're a great resource for us. We've trained with them. We work with them, and they would come in. And they also have some bigger equipment. Again, depending on the complexity of the spill, and it would go from us to the state level. If we would need another team to come in, that would be accessible to us. Private industry, there's a lot of cleanup companies. They can come in, and then once the spill gets say a truck spills and it's running down a ditch, our crews will go and stop it at the ditch. Well, what will happen then is a cleanup company will come in at the next level, and they would come in and clean up the ditch. They would take the product out. That's where you see them taking the dirt out of the ditch and reclaiming that. And it could go all the way up to the federal level if they need to, which is kind of what happened in Beaver Dam.
Battalion Chief John Spartz, West Bend Fire Department. Been with the department 30 years.
Give or take a couple. Yeah.
John, there we go. Well, great to meet you. Great job. We're out of time here, but great to learn about this hazmat team. And as you guys pointed out before we went on here, similar deal compared to the dive team we have in Washington County, how lucky we are. And it's emergency response. It's big. John, we appreciate you. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me. It was great.
Appreciate that. John Breuer, Allenton Fire Chief. John, thank you, sir. Good to talk about this. Very lucky, aren't we?
Yes. We say that, sometimes you have to promote yourself, and we're firefighters are pretty laid back. They're not braggers, but they know what they do, and they're proud to do it. But in our area, and I've mentioned this before on our program, Dodge, Washington, southeastern Wisconsin, I think there's a lot of places in the state that are, for lack of a better term, jealous of the way we work together so cohesively. We had a situation down in the marsh on a hazmat thing about 10 years ago, and a Milwaukee team came up at that time too, and we had accountability records were 74, 75 personnel on scene, and they thought it was one department. It was 5. And they're like, they didn't know the difference. And that's really what it is. When you need that help, it needs to be consistent, cohesive. Everybody knows their duties, their responsibilities, and that makes the situation, what was a crisis or an emergency, really, people say you make it look so easy. Well, it may look easy, but there's a lot of work to get to that point.
Says it all. What a nice compliment right there. John Breuer, good to see you, sir. Thanks so much.
Yep, thanks, Tom. We appreciate it.
Absolutely, and we appreciate the Washington County Fire Chiefs Association. Appreciate that. Good talk today. And again, the Washington County Haz Mat Team, we appreciate them. Allenton Fire Chief John Breuer, along with Battalion Chief John Spartz with the West Bend Fire Department.